I sat alone in my living room on Christmas Eve, the glow of my phone screen casting shadows across my face, watching a video that shattered what was left of my heart into 1,000 pieces. There they were. All of them. My son Brian carving turkey at the head of a crowded dining table. His wife Clara beaming at the camera, her voice cheerful and bright as she announced, "Family only this year, keeping it simple." Children laughed in the background. Relatives I recognized filled every corner of their house. The table practically groaned under the weight of food, glazed ham, roasted vegetables, pies stacked on the counter. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. Just 6 days earlier, they had looked me straight in the eye and told me Christmas was cancelled. Money was too tight, they said. They were just staying in, they said. No celebrations this year, they said. And I believed them. I spent my entire Christmas Eve baking a small batch of sugar cookies in my empty kitchen. I set a single red candle on my dining table and tried to convince myself that loneliness was just part of getting older. That this was normal. That I should be grateful they even bothered to tell me they wouldn't be celebrating. But now, staring at that video, watching my son laugh while surrounded by the family he chose, I realized something that made my chest tighten and my hands shake. They didn't cancel Christmas. They cancelled me. The candle on my table had burned down to a stub, wax pooling around the base, and somewhere in the darkness of my quiet house, I heard my phone buzz again. Another notification. Another message I wasn't ready to read yet. Because once I opened it, once I saw what my son wanted from me this time, everything would change between us forever. Have you ever felt invisible to the people you sacrificed everything for? Have you ever wondered if the love you gave so freely was nothing more than a transaction to them? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. My name is Margaret Ellison, and I'm 74 years old. For most of my life, I believed that family was everything. I believed that the strength of a family was measured by loyalty, by love, by showing up when it mattered most. I worked my fingers raw as a seamstress for 30 years, stitching wedding dresses and hemming pants for neighbors who could barely afford to pay me. When my husband Harold died 15 years ago, I inherited his small construction business and kept it running, not because I understood much about lumber and contracts, but because it was all we had built together. It was never glamorous work, but it kept food on the table and a roof over our heads. And when Brian got married to Clara 10 years ago, I devoted every bit of what I had left to making sure they would never struggle the way Harold and I did. I helped them with the down payment on their house. Not a loan, a gift. I paid for repairs when their roof leaked during that terrible storm 3 winters ago. I covered unexpected bills when Brian's hours got cut at work. When they needed groceries, I showed up with bags full of food and never expected to be paid back. When they needed someone to watch the kids, I dropped everything, no questions asked. I never kept score. I never demanded gratitude. I simply wanted to be valued, to be respected, to be included in the life I had worked so hard to help them build. But what I didn't realize, what I refused to see for so long, was that quiet givers like me are often the easiest to take for granted. The people who never complain, who never make demands, who always show up with open hands and full hearts, we become invisible. We become expected. We become the safety net people forget is even there until they need it again. And when that video appeared on my phone screen, when I saw the truth of what they had done, something inside me finally cracked wide open. I set my phone down on the arm of my chair and stared at that dying candle flame. My reflection flickered in the darkened window across from me, an old woman sitting alone in a house that used to feel like home but now felt more like a waiting room. The buzz of my phone cut through the silence again. Persistent. Demanding. I picked it up slowly, my thumb hovering over the message notification from Brian. And what I read in those few short sentences would set everything in motion, a reckoning I never planned but one that had been building for years. What I read would force me to make a choice I never thought I'd have to make, between being the mother who kept giving no matter how much it cost her, or the woman who finally chose herself. Chapter 2. Before I tell you what that message said, before I show you how everything fell apart, you need to understand who I was before that Christmas Eve. You need to know what I gave up to become the woman sitting alone in that dark living room. I wasn't always invisible. There was a time when Harold would come home from job sites covered in sawdust, kiss my cheek, and tell me I was the strongest woman he'd ever known. We met when I was 23, working at a little tailor shop on Main Street. He came in needing his work pants hemmed, and I remember thinking his hands looked too gentle for construction work, calloused but careful, like someone who understood that building things required patience. We got married 6 months later in a ceremony so small that only 12 people showed up. But it was ours, and it was real, and for 35 years we built a life together that wasn't fancy but felt solid. When Brian was born, I quit the tailor shop to stay home. We couldn't afford childcare, and Harold's business was just getting started, so I made it work. I sewed clothes for neighbors in our garage, hemming dresses and fixing torn jackets for $5 here, $10 there. It wasn't much, but it added up. Brian was everything to us. Our only child. Harold used to say that boys needed their mothers more than they'd ever admit, that I should always be there for him even when he acted like he didn't need me anymore. And I was. God, I was always there. When Brian scraped his knee learning to ride a bike, I was there. When he got rejected from his first choice college and cried in his bedroom for 2 days, I was there. When he met Clara at that coffee shop downtown and came home starry-eyed talking about the woman he was going to marry, I was there, smiling and hopeful, believing she would become the daughter I never had. Harold died when Brian was 28. A heart attack on a Tuesday afternoon while he was inspecting a foundation pour. He was gone before the ambulance even arrived. I remember standing at his funeral, thinking that half of me had been buried in that casket. But I couldn't fall apart because Brian needed me. He was grieving too, and someone had to hold things together. So I took over Harold's business. I didn't know the first thing about construction contracts or building permits, but I learned. I hired Harold's old foreman to handle the actual work while I managed the books and dealt with clients. It wasn't easy, and there were months when I wasn't sure we'd make payroll, but I kept it running for 3 years before finally selling it. The sale gave me enough to live comfortably and help Brian when he needed it. And he needed it often. 2 years after Harold died, Brian married Clara in a beautiful outdoor ceremony that I helped pay for. She wore a dress I didn't sew but wished I had, and when she called me mom during her vows, I cried so hard I could barely see. I thought I was gaining a daughter. I thought our family was growing, not shrinking. For the first year, things felt warm. Clara would call me just to chat. She'd ask for my recipes and actually seemed interested when I told her stories about Harold. She laughed at my jokes and hugged me when we said goodbye. But then something shifted. Slowly at first, like ice forming on a pond, you don't notice it until you step on it and feel how cold it's become underneath. The phone calls became shorter. The hugs felt stiffer. When I'd offer advice about anything, cooking, marriage, money, I'd catch Clara rolling her eyes or exchanging looks with Brian like I was some annoying relative who didn't understand how the modern world worked. I told myself I was being oversensitive. That daughters-in-law needed space to build their own lives. That I should step back and let them figure things out. So I did. I stepped back. But I never stopped helping. When they bought their house 5 years ago, they were $10,000 short on the down payment. I wrote the check without hesitation. It wasn't a loan. I never expected them to pay me back. I just wanted them to have the stability Harold and I had worked so hard to build. When their furnace died 2 winters ago and they couldn't afford the replacement, I paid for it. When Clara's car broke down and the repair bill came to $2,000, I covered it. When they needed someone to watch the kids so they could take a weekend trip to the beach, I showed up with activities planned and homemade meals prepared. I became the safety net they never acknowledged but always expected. And the worst part? I was happy to do it. I convinced myself that this was what family did. That love meant sacrifice. That being needed was the same as being valued. Harold used to tell me, "Take care of Brian, he'll need you." And I took those words like a sacred vow, something I had to honor even after Harold was gone. But what Harold didn't tell me, what he couldn't have known, was that need and appreciation aren't the same thing. That you can be necessary to someone's life while being completely disposable to their heart. I didn't see it then. I didn't want to see it. But I should have known something was deeply wrong the Thanksgiving before that terrible Christmas. I should have recognized the warning signs flashing right in front of me, like road flares on a dark highway. I just didn't want to believe that the people I loved most in the world had stopped seeing me as family and started seeing me as something else entirely, a resource to be used, a problem to be managed, a burden to be hidden away when it was convenient. But I was about to learn exactly how they saw me, and the lesson would cost me everything I thought I knew about the family I'd sacrificed my whole life to protect. Chapter 3. Thanksgiving dinner was at their house that year. Clara had insisted on hosting, said she wanted to show off her new dining room table, the one I'd helped them buy when their old one collapsed under the weight of too many family dinners. I arrived early with 3 pies I'd spent all morning baking. Apple, pumpkin, and pecan, because I could never remember which one was Brian's favorite and I didn't want him to feel disappointed. Clara met me at the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, Margaret, you didn't have to bring so much," she said, taking the pies from my hands. "We already have dessert." But she took them anyway and set them on the kitchen counter next to a store-bought cake still in its plastic container. The house was full. Clara's parents were there, her 2 sisters with their husbands and kids, Brian's old college roommate and his wife. The dining room buzzed with conversation and laughter, and for a moment I felt that old familiar warmth, the feeling of being part of something bigger than myself. I should have known it wouldn't last. Dinner itself was fine. The turkey was a little dry, but I didn't say anything because Clara had worked hard on it. I sat at the far end of the table, next to Clara's nephew who was too busy on his phone to talk to me, and I ate quietly while conversations swirled around me like I wasn't even there. It was during dessert when everything changed. Clara had cut slices of my apple pie for everyone, and I just picked up my fork to take a bite when she leaned close to me. Close enough that I could smell her perfume, something floral and too strong. She smiled, but there was something sharp behind it, something that made my stomach tighten even before she spoke. "Don't eat too much, Margaret," she said, her voice light and teasing but loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "We don't want to buy a bigger coffin someday." The table went quiet for half a second, and then someone laughed. Clara's sister snorted into her wine glass. Brian's old roommate chuckled uncomfortably and looked down at his plate. "And Brian?" Brian didn't say a word. He just took another bite of pie like nothing had happened. I felt my face go hot. My hand froze halfway to my mouth, fork suspended in the air like I'd forgotten how to move. I forced myself to smile, to pretend it didn't hurt, to laugh it off the way you're supposed to when someone makes a joke at your expense. "Oh, Clara, you're terrible," I said, and my voice sounded steady even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Everyone went back to their conversations. The moment passed like a stone dropping into water, ripples fading until the surface looked calm again. But underneath, something had shifted. Something had broken that I couldn't name yet. I set my fork down and didn't take another bite. When I left that night, Clara hugged me at the door and thanked me for the pies. Brian walked me to my car and kissed my cheek and told me to drive safe. Everything looked normal from the outside. But I lay awake that night replaying that moment over and over. The tone of her voice. The laughter that followed. The way Brian stayed silent, like my humiliation wasn't worth defending. "Don't eat too much, Margaret. We don't want to buy a bigger coffin someday." It wasn't the first cruel thing Clara had said to me, but it was the first time she'd said it in front of everyone. The first time she'd tested the waters to see if anyone would stand up for me. And when no one did, when the table laughed and moved on, she learned something important. She learned that I was safe to mock. That I wouldn't fight back. That no one, not even my own son, would come to my defense. Looking back now, that Thanksgiving dinner was the beginning of the end. It was the moment I should have walked away, should have demanded respect, should have told them all exactly what I thought of their cruelty. But I didn't. I smiled and pretended it was fine because that's what I'd always done. That's what quiet givers do, we absorb the pain so everyone else can stay comfortable. After that night, things got worse in small, unmistakable ways. Clara stopped pretending to care about my opinions. When I'd suggest something, anything from what color to paint their kitchen to what school might be good for the kids, she'd sigh dramatically and say something like, "That's not really how we do things anymore, Margaret." The eye rolls became more frequent. The dismissive tones sharper. When I'd show up with gifts for the grandkids, Clara would barely glance at them before setting them aside like they were junk mail she'd deal with later. And Brian? He became a master of looking away at just the right moment. Every time Clara said something cutting, every time she made me feel small, he'd suddenly need to check his phone or refill his drink or deal with something in the garage. He chose the path of least resistance every single time, and the path of least resistance never led to defending his mother. I started noticing other things too. The way they'd change the subject when I walked into a room. The inside jokes I wasn't part of. The family photos on their walls that seemed to feature everyone except me. I was being erased slowly, piece by piece, and I kept telling myself it was all in my head. That I was being paranoid. That families grew and changed and sometimes you had to accept a smaller role in your children's lives. But deep down, in the part of me that still remembered who I was before I became someone's safety net, I knew the truth. They didn't want me around unless they needed something from me. And even then, they resented having to ask. I was a walking ATM with a pulse, a convenient resource they could tap whenever bills came due, and the moment I stopped being useful, I'd disappear completely from their lives. I just didn't know how soon that moment would come, or how brutally they'd prove me right when it finally did. December came cold and gray that year, the kind of weather that makes you want to stay inside wrapped in blankets with something warm to drink. I'd always loved this time of year. Harold and I used to decorate our house the day after Thanksgiving, strings of lights along the roofline, a wreath on the door, a tree in the living room that we'd cover with ornaments we'd collected over the years. After he died, I kept up the tradition by myself. It felt lonely putting up decorations for an empty house, but I did it anyway because stopping felt like giving up, and I wasn't ready to give up on Christmas yet. That first week of December, I was at the store buying wrapping paper when I ran into one of Clara's sisters. She seemed surprised to see me, almost uncomfortable, and when I asked if they had any plans for the holidays, she got this strange look on her face and said, "Oh, I think Clara mentioned something about keeping it low-key this year." I didn't think much of it at the time. But a few days later, I called Brian to ask about Christmas dinner. "Hey Mom," he said, and I could hear the television in the background, some sports game he was watching. "What's up?" "I was just wondering about Christmas plans," I said, trying to keep my voice light and casual. "Should I bring anything this year? I was thinking about making that cranberry sauce you like, the one with the orange zest." There was a pause. Too long. The kind of silence that means someone's trying to figure out what to say. "Actually, Mom, we're not really doing anything big this year." "Oh," I said, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's fine. It's just, money's tight, you know? We're trying to be smart about spending. Probably just going to have a quiet night in. Nothing fancy." I gripped the phone tighter. "I could bring food. You wouldn't have to spend anything." No, it's not about the food. We just want to keep it simple. Low stress. Maybe next year we'll do something bigger." Clara's voice drifted from somewhere in the background, saying something I couldn't quite make out. "Look Mom, I gotta go. Game's getting good. We'll talk soon, okay?" And he hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, staring at my calendar where I'd already marked Christmas Day with a red star, the way I'd done every year since Brian was born. Money's tight. Keeping it simple. Just a quiet night in. I believed him. Of course I believed him. Why wouldn't I? These were hard times for everyone. Young families struggled. I knew that. I'd lived through my own struggles when Brian was little and every dollar mattered. If they needed to skip the big celebration this year, I could understand that. I could accept it. So I did. I called Clara 2 days later just to check in, to let them know I understood and it was fine. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted. "Hey Margaret," she said, and I could hear her typing on a keyboard. "What's going on?" "I just wanted to say that I understand about Christmas. Brian told me things are tight this year. I completely get it." More typing. "Yeah, we're just trying to be responsible. You know how it is." "Of course. If you need anything though, just let me know. I'm always here." "Mem. Okay. Thanks Margaret. I've got to finish this email. Talk later." She hung up before I could say goodbye. I spent the next week watching them post on social media. Pictures of the kids at the mall sitting on Santa's lap. Clara sharing recipes for holiday cookies. Brian posting about some ugly sweater party at his office. Money's tight, I kept thinking. They're just being careful. I didn't decorate my house that year. It felt wrong somehow, putting up lights and ornaments when there'd be no one to share it with. Instead, I bought a small poinsettia for the kitchen table and told myself that was festive enough. On December 23rd, I went to the grocery store and bought ingredients for a small batch of sugar cookies. Just enough for me. I picked up a frozen dinner for Christmas Day, turkey and mashed potatoes for one, the kind that comes in a divided tray you heat in the oven. The cashier was young, maybe 19, with candy cane earrings and a Santa hat. She smiled at my pitiful cart. "Small Christmas this year?" she asked. "Just me this year," I said, and I tried to smile back. "Keeping it simple." I said it like it was my choice. Like I'd decided to spend Christmas alone. Like it was some kind of peaceful, intentional solitude instead of what it really was, abandonment. Christmas Eve arrived with freezing rain that made the streets slick and dangerous. I spent the afternoon baking cookies, the same recipe I'd made every Christmas since Brian was 5 years old. Butter, sugar, vanilla, flour, simple ingredients that turned into something sweet if you handled them right. I rolled out the dough and cut shapes with old cookie cutters Harold had bought me years ago. Stars, trees, bells, angels. I arranged them on baking sheets and slid them into the oven, and for a moment the house smelled like it used to when Brian was little, when Christmas meant something more than loneliness. When they were done, I set them on a plate and made myself a cup of tea. I lit a red candle on the dining room table and sat down with my phone, scrolling through pictures from Christmases past. Brian as a toddler, frosting smeared on his face. Harold in a ridiculous reindeer sweater I'd bought him as a joke. The three of us in front of our tree, happy and whole. That's when I saw it. A notification from Clara's social media. A new video posted 30 minutes ago. My thumb hovered over it for a second, and something in my gut told me not to open it. Some instinct whispered that whatever was on the other side of that click would hurt me in a way I wouldn't recover from. But I opened it anyway. The video started with Clara's laughing face filling the screen, and then the camera panned across their dining room. The table was enormous, stretched out with extra leaves I didn't even know they had. It was covered with food, a massive turkey in the center, golden and glistening. Bowls of mashed potatoes and stuffing and green bean casserole. Plates of rolls and dishes of cranberry sauce and at least 3 different pies lined up on the counter behind them. The house was packed. Clara's parents sat at one end of the table. Her sisters and their families filled the middle. Brian's old college friends crowded around the edges. Kids ran through the frame laughing and chasing each other. And there was Brian, standing at the head of the table with a carving knife in his hand, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Clara's voice came through my phone speaker, bright and cheerful and so painfully happy. Family only this year, keeping it simple. The camera panned around the room again, capturing every smiling face, every full plate, every bit of warmth and joy and togetherness that I wasn't part of. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. I watched the entire video. I don't know why. Maybe I thought there'd be some explanation at the end, some mention of me, some acknowledgement that I existed. But there wasn't. The video ended with everyone raising their glasses in a toast while Clara laughed and said something about being grateful for family. I set my phone down on the table next to my single candle and my plate of cookies that no one would eat but me. Money's tight. Just a quiet night in. No celebrations this year. They hadn't cancelled Christmas. They'd cancelled me. Chapter 5. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I just sat there in the flickering candlelight, feeling something inside me shut down like a door closing on a room I'd never enter again. The rational part of my brain tried to make excuses for them. Maybe they'd planned this last minute. Maybe they'd wanted to tell me but didn't know how. Maybe there was some explanation I wasn't seeing. But the video had been posted at 7:30 on Christmas Eve, and judging by the food on that table, they'd been planning this for days. Maybe weeks. The turkey alone takes hours to cook. You don't just throw together a feast like that on a whim. Which meant they'd lied to me. Deliberately. Looked me in the eye and told me they weren't celebrating while they were already planning a party they had no intention of inviting me to. I picked up my phone and watched the video again. And again. Like I was searching for some detail I'd missed, some proof that this wasn't as cruel as it seemed. But every time I watched it, it got worse. The way Brian laughed with his friends. The way Clara beamed at the camera. The way the house glowed with warmth and light while I sat alone in my cold kitchen with cookies I'd baked out of habit more than hope. Someone in the video made a joke and everyone laughed. Clara's sister said something about this being the best Christmas yet. One of the kids ran past with a candy cane, shrieking with joy. They weren't just celebrating without me. They were celebrating better without me. I was the problem they'd solved by erasing. The burden they'd lifted by lying. The unwanted guest they'd cleverly avoided by simply not inviting. And the worst part? They didn't even feel bad about it. There was no guilt in that video, no awkward glances at the camera like maybe they knew they were doing something wrong. They looked happy. Relieved, even. Like they'd finally figured out how to have the Christmas they really wanted, and all it took was leaving me behind. I blew out the candle and sat in the darkness of my kitchen, listening to the rain tap against the windows. Somewhere down the street, I could hear people singing carols. Someone's door opened and closed, followed by laughter and the sound of children's voices. The whole world was celebrating Christmas except me. My phone buzzed in my hand. Another notification. For a wild second, I thought maybe it was Brian, maybe he'd realized I'd seen the video and was calling to explain, to apologize, to say it was all a terrible mistake. But it wasn't a call. Just another comment on Clara's video. Someone writing, "This looks amazing. So glad you got to spend it with family." I turned my phone face down on the table and stood up slowly, my knees aching the way they always did when I'd been sitting too long. I wrapped the cookies in plastic wrap and put them in the refrigerator where they'd stay until I eventually threw them away because even I couldn't eat that many cookies alone. I turned off the kitchen light and walked to my bedroom. I didn't bother changing into pajamas. I just lay down on top of the covers in my clothes and stared at the ceiling. This is what it feels like to be erased, I thought. This is what it feels like to realize that all the years you spent giving and sacrificing and showing up meant nothing to the people you did it for. I'd spent 15 years since Harold died making sure Brian never felt alone. I'd been there for every milestone, every crisis, every moment he needed help. I'd given money I couldn't really afford to give. I'd babysat when I was tired. I'd swallowed my pride and accepted Clara's cruelty because I thought that's what family did. You endured, you forgave, you kept showing up even when it hurt. And this was my reward. A lie. An exclusion. A video posted for the world to see that I didn't matter enough to be included in family only. I must have fallen asleep eventually because when I woke up it was Christmas morning and weak gray light filtered through my bedroom curtains. The house was silent. No children running down the hallway to see what Santa brought. No Harold making coffee in the kitchen. No calls from Brian wishing me Merry Christmas. Just silence and the realization that this was my life now. This was what I'd been reduced to. I got up and made coffee. I heated up my frozen turkey dinner even though it was only 9 in the morning because what did it matter? I ate it at the kitchen table while scrolling through my phone, torturing myself by looking at more photos from their Christmas celebration. Someone had tagged Brian in a group photo. He stood in the center with his arm around Clara, surrounded by smiling faces. The caption read, "Best Christmas crew ever." I closed the app and opened my messages. Nothing from Brian. Nothing from Clara. It was like I didn't exist. The day crawled by. I turned on the television and watched old movies I'd seen 100 times before. I thought about calling some friends, but everyone had their own families, their own celebrations. I didn't want to be the sad old woman interrupting their happiness with my loneliness. By evening, I'd accepted it. This was my reality. I'd given everything to people who saw me as disposable, and there was nothing I could do to change it. That's what I thought, anyway. And then, 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a text message that would change everything between us forever. Chapter 6. The text came on December 28th at 2:15 in the afternoon. I was folding laundry in my bedroom, matching socks that had no partner, when my phone buzzed on the dresser. I almost didn't look at it. I'd spent 3 days in a fog of numbness, moving through my house like a ghost haunting her own life. I'd stopped checking social media. Stopped torturing myself with pictures of their perfect family Christmas. I'd even considered blocking them both, but something stopped me, maybe the last shred of hope that they'd realize what they'd done and apologize. But when I picked up the phone and saw Brian's name on the screen, it wasn't an apology waiting for me. "Hey Mom, could you help out with the mortgage this month? We're a little tight." I read it once, twice, 3 times. Each time, the words rearranged themselves in my head into different meanings, but they all led to the same place. My son wanted money from the mother he just excluded from Christmas. No Merry Christmas. No hope you had a good holiday. No acknowledgement whatsoever that they'd lied to me and left me alone on the biggest family day of the year. Just a casual request for money, like I was a bank account with a pulse instead of a human being with feelings. My hands started shaking, but not from age or weakness. This was different. This was something sharper, cleaner, like a blade that had been sitting in ice water finally cutting through. For 15 years, I'd been the safety net. The backup plan. The emergency fund they tapped whenever life got expensive. And I'd given freely, happily even, because I thought that's what love looked like, sacrifice without strings, help without hesitation. But sitting there with that text message glowing on my screen, I finally understood what Harold had been too kind to tell me before he died. He'd said, "Take care of Brian, he'll need you." But what he should have said was, "Teach Brian to stand on his own, or he'll drain you dry and never notice." Need and appreciation aren't the same thing. Being useful isn't the same as being valued. And love that only flows one direction eventually runs out, no matter how deep the well started. I thought about the mortgage I'd helped them get by contributing to their down payment. I thought about every repair bill I'd covered, every grocery run I'd funded, every crisis I'd solved with my checkbook while they complained about money being tight. Money's tight, but not too tight for a Christmas feast that could feed 20 people. Not too tight for decorations and gifts and a house full of guests. Not too tight for everything except inviting the woman who'd made it all possible. Something inside me cracked open, and for the first time in 3 days, I felt something other than numb sadness. I felt clarity. Cold, sharp, undeniable clarity. They didn't love me. Maybe they never had. They loved what I could do for them, what I could give them, how I could make their lives easier without ever asking them to reciprocate. And the moment I stopped being convenient, the moment including me became slightly awkward or uncomfortable, I disappeared from their lives like I'd never existed at all. I opened the text message again and stared at those words. Could you help out with the mortgage this month? Not can we talk about Christmas? Not I'm sorry we hurt you. Just another request, another expectation, another withdrawal from the Bank of Margaret. I started typing. My fingers moved slowly at first, carefully, making sure every word was exactly what I meant to say. Ask the family you chose. 6 words. That's all it took to end 15 years of quiet giving and silent suffering. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, and then I did something I should have done years ago. I opened my banking app and canceled the automatic transfer I'd set up to help with their mortgage. $500 every month, deposited directly into their account on the first, money they'd come to expect like it was their right instead of my choice. Cancelled. Done. Finished. Then I blocked the payment request Brian had sent through the bank's app. No more emergency funds. No more bailouts. No more checking account they could tap whenever Clara wanted new furniture or Brian's truck needed repairs. My hands steadied as I worked through each screen, each confirmation, each final click that severed another financial tie between us. And with every action, I felt lighter. Not happy exactly, but free in a way I hadn't felt since Harold died. For years, I'd confused being needed with being loved. I'd thought that making myself indispensable would make me impossible to exclude. But I'd been wrong. All it did was teach them to see me as a resource instead of a person. Well, the resource was closed now. The bank was shut down. And they were about to learn what it felt like when the safety net they'd taken for granted suddenly disappeared. I set my phone down and went back to folding laundry. My heart was pounding, adrenaline flooding my system like I'd just done something dangerous. And maybe I had. Maybe choosing yourself after decades of choosing everyone else is the most dangerous thing a woman like me can do. But I wasn't scared. For the first time in 3 days, I wasn't sad either. I was done. And that single text message I'd sent, those 6 simple words, would echo louder through their lives than any scream or confrontation ever could. Chapter 7. The silence that followed was exactly what I expected. No immediate response. No frantic calls. No messages asking what I meant or why I was upset. For the first 2 weeks of January, my phone stayed quiet. Brian didn't reach out. Clara didn't text. It was like they'd taken my response as permission to pretend I didn't exist, which was fine with me. I'd spent Christmas alone, I could spend the new year the same way. But I knew something they didn't. I knew that their mortgage was due on the first of every month, and I knew that without my $500 contribution, they were going to come up short. I knew because I'd seen their budget once when I was helping them figure out their finances 2 years ago. I'd seen how tight things were even with my help, how little buffer they had between paycheck and bills. And I knew that Clara had expensive tastes she refused to adjust. The fancy coffee maker on their counter. The subscription services they never cancelled. The shopping trips she posted about on social media. The new couch they'd bought last fall that cost more than my first car. Money's tight, she'd said. But not tight enough to actually cut back on anything. The automatic withdrawal from my account that should have hit their checking on January 1st never came. I watched my own account balance stay steady, that $500 sitting there unused for the first time in 5 years. It felt strange. Wrong, almost. Like I'd forgotten to do something important. But I hadn't forgotten. I'd chosen. And I was learning to live with the weight of that choice. On January 7th, my phone rang. Not a text this time, an actual call. Brian's name lit up my screen at 9 in the evening, after he would have gotten home from work and probably had a conversation with Clara about the bills. I let it ring 4 times before I answered. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out steady. "Hello, Mom." Brian's voice was tight, controlled in a way that told me he was angry but trying not to show it. "Did you get my text?" "I did." And I responded. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing, could imagine him standing in his garage or his backyard where Clara couldn't hear, trying to figure out how to handle this unexpected rebellion from the woman who'd never said no before. "That wasn't an answer, Mom. That was, I don't even know what that was." "It was an answer, Brian. Just not the one you wanted." "What's that supposed to mean?" His voice got sharper. "Are you seriously mad about Christmas? Is that what this is about?" "You lied to me." "We didn't lie. Things changed last minute. Clara's family wanted to get together and it was easier to do it at our house. You told me you weren't celebrating. You told me money was too tight. And then you posted a video for the entire world to see showing me that was a lie." "It wasn't a lie. We just didn't want a big thing with you, they're making it complicated." The words hit me like a slap, even though he probably didn't mean them the way they sounded. Or maybe he did. Maybe that was exactly how they saw me, a complication. A problem to be managed. An obligation that made their real celebrations less enjoyable. "I see," I said quietly. "Look, I don't have time for this drama right now. The mortgage is due and we need help. Can you just send the money?" "Drama." He called my hurt feelings drama. "No." The word came out simple and final, and I heard him inhale sharply like I'd said something shocking. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no, Brian. I'm not sending money. Not this month. Not any month going forward." "Are you kidding me right now? You're going to let us lose our house because your feelings got hurt over a Christmas dinner. I'm going to let you handle your own responsibilities like the grown man you are. The mortgage is your problem, not mine." "This is insane. You've always helped us. You can't just stop." "I can and I am." His voice rose, frustration bleeding through. "This is because of Clara, isn't it? You've never liked her. You've always been weird about her. This has nothing to do with whether I like Clara. This has to do with you choosing to lie to me, exclude me, and then treat me like an ATM you can access whenever you need cash." "That's not fair." "You're right. It's not fair. It hasn't been fair for years. But I'm done being the one who absorbs all the unfairness so you can stay comfortable." "Mom." "Ask the family you chose, Brian." That's what I said, and that's what I meant. You made your choice on Christmas. Now you get to live with it. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking again, but this time it felt good. Powerful, even. Like I'd finally said the things I should have said years ago. The phone rang again immediately. I declined the call. It rang again. Declined. A text came through, "This is ridiculous. Call me back." I turned off my phone and sat in the silence of my living room, feeling my heartbeat slowly return to normal. I'd done it. I'd actually said no. I'd stood up for myself and refused to be used anymore, and the world hadn't ended. The sky hadn't fallen. I was still breathing, still okay, maybe even better than okay. But I knew this was just the beginning. Brian was angry now, but he'd get over it once he realized I was serious. He'd find a way to cover the mortgage, or he wouldn't, and either way it would be his responsibility. What I didn't know yet was how far they'd fall once the safety net was gone, or how desperate they'd become when they realized that the woman they'd taken for granted for so long had finally walked away. 3 days after I hung up on Brian, Clara showed up at my door. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard the knock, light and cheerful like we were friends who hadn't seen each other in a while instead of what we actually were, 2 women pretending for years that we liked each other. I dried my hands on a towel and walked to the door slowly, taking my time, making her wait. Through the frosted glass panel I could see her shape shifting from foot to foot, and I knew before I opened the door exactly what this was. This was the sweet approach. This was Clara coming to smooth things over with charm and fake warmth because Brian's anger hadn't worked. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Margaret. Her smile was bright and wide, the kind you paste on when you're trying too hard. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. Can I come in? I brought coffee. She held up 2 cups from that expensive coffee place downtown, the one where a single drink costs more than a whole pot at home. She was wearing yoga pants and a designer jacket, her hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, looking like she'd just come from the gym or was about to go, the casual athletic look that somehow cost more than my entire wardrobe. I'm actually busy right now, I said. Her smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. Oh come on, it'll just take a minute. We should talk. About what? About, everything. The holidays. Brian said you two had a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. That's what we were calling it now. There was no misunderstanding, Clara. I understood perfectly. Look, I know Christmas was complicated, but you have to understand our side. It was last minute, and we were just trying to keep it simple with my family, and... You lied to me. The smile disappeared. We didn't lie. We just didn't want to hurt your feelings by telling you it was family only. I am family. I'm Brian's mother. You know what I mean. It was complicated. And honestly, Margaret, you can be a lot sometimes. We just needed one day without having to worry about managing you. Managing me. Like I was a difficult child who needed supervision instead of the woman who'd made their entire life possible. Something in my face must have shown what I was thinking because Clara's expression shifted, became almost pleading. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant, look, can we please just move past this? Brian's really stressed about the mortgage and you're making this so much harder than it needs to be. I'm making it harder? Yes. You know we depend on that help. We've built our budget around it. You can't just pull the rug out from under us because you got your feelings hurt. There it was. The real Clara, the one who'd been hiding under all that fake sweetness. The one who saw my hurt as inconvenient. The one who thought my feelings mattered less than their budget. I don't think you understand what's happening here, I said quietly. I'm not punishing you. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm simply done being treated like I don't matter except when you need something. That's not fair. We appreciate everything you do. No, you don't. You expect it. There's a difference. Clara's jaw tightened. Fine. You want an apology? I'm sorry we didn't invite you to Christmas. There. Is that what you needed to hear? Can we move on now? An apology doesn't mean anything if you don't understand what you did wrong. And you clearly don't. What I did wrong. Are you serious right now? I'm standing here with coffee, trying to make peace, and you're acting like I committed some unforgivable sin. It was one Christmas, Margaret. One day. And you're going to destroy our financial stability over it. I'm not destroying anything. Your financial problems are not my responsibility. They are when you've been helping us for years and we've planned our lives around that help. Then you planned wrong. You should have been building a life you could afford on your own, not one that required my constant support. Clara's eyes went cold in a way I'd never seen before. You know what? Fine. Keep your money. We'll figure it out on our own. But don't come crawling back when you realize you're going to spend the rest of your life alone because you drove away the only family you have left. She threw one of the coffee cups at my porch. It hit the ground and splattered everywhere, steam rising from the puddle, and turned on her heel, walking back to her car with angry, clipped steps. I watched her drive away and then quietly closed the door. My hands were trembling, but not from fear or regret. From relief. From the realization that I'd just seen the real Clara, the one she'd been hiding behind politeness for years. The one who saw me as an obstacle instead of a person. The one who thought threatening me with loneliness would bring me back in line. But she'd miscalculated. I'd already spent Christmas alone. I knew what loneliness felt like now, and it wasn't worse than being used. It wasn't worse than being excluded and lied to and treated like I was disposable. Being alone was lonely. But being surrounded by people who saw you as nothing more than a walking checkbook? That was something darker. That was a different kind of alone, the kind where you're in the room but still invisible. Where you're included in the photo but cropped out before it's posted. Where you're family until it's inconvenient. I'd rather be lonely on my own terms than lonely in a room full of people who wished I wasn't there. I cleaned up the spilled coffee from my porch and went back inside. My phone was buzzing with texts from Brian, angry at first, then pleading, then angry again. I didn't respond to any of them. They wanted me to break. They expected me to give in because I always had before. They thought this was a tantrum that would blow over once I calmed down and remembered my place. But this wasn't a tantrum. This was a boundary. And boundaries don't negotiate. February brought cold that seeped into everything, the kind that made your bones ache and your house feel drafty no matter how high you turned the heat. It also brought consequences. I heard through mutual friends, the ones who still talk to me anyway, that Brian and Clara were struggling. The mortgage was late 2 months in a row. They'd gotten warning letters from the bank. Clara's car had a mechanical problem they couldn't afford to fix, so she was driving Brian's truck while he carpooled to work with a coworker. I didn't feel happy about it. But I didn't feel guilty either. I felt something quieter than either of those. I felt at peace with my decision. One Saturday morning, I ran into Brian at the grocery store. We nearly collided at the end of an aisle, my cart going one way while he was coming from the other, and for a second we both just stood there staring at each other. He looked tired. His hair needed cutting, and there were shadows under his eyes I'd never noticed before. He'd lost weight, not in a healthy way but in the way people do when stress eats at them from the inside. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked on the word. "Brian. Can we talk? Please?" I hesitated, then nodded. We pushed our carts to the side of the aisle, out of the way of other shoppers, and stood there in awkward silence until he finally found words. "We got a foreclosure notice." I didn't respond. What was there to say? I'd known this was coming. They'd built a life they couldn't afford and expected me to subsidize it forever. "We're going to lose the house, Mom. Everything we worked for. Everything you helped us build. I helped you with a down payment. The rest was supposed to be your responsibility." It was. It is. But we counted on. "You counted on me to keep bailing you out. That's not the same thing as taking responsibility." His jaw clenched. "You're really going to let this happen? You're going to watch us lose everything and not do anything to stop it?" "Brian, I gave you $500 every month for 5 years. That's $30,000. I paid for repairs and emergencies and expenses you couldn't cover. I babysat and brought groceries and never asked for anything back except to be included in your lives. We did include you. You excluded me from Christmas. You lied to me about money being tight while you threw a party for 20 people. You posted it on social media knowing I'd see it, and when I finally said no to one request, you called me unfair." He looked down at his shoes. "I know that was wrong. Clara knows it too. She shouldn't have thrown that coffee. She was just stressed." "Stressed about losing access to my money, you mean?" "That's not," he stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "Okay. Yes. We need the money. But it's not just about that. We miss you, Mom. I miss you. Do you? Or do you miss what I provided?" "Both." He looked up at me, and his eyes were red-rimmed like he might cry. "I miss both. And I'm sorry. I'm really sorry for how we treated you. You deserved better." It was the first real apology I'd heard from him, and part of me wanted to accept it, to forgive everything and go back to how things were. But I'd learned something in the months since Christmas. I'd learned that sorry doesn't mean much if the behavior doesn't change. That people can be genuinely sorry they hurt you while still believing they had good reasons for doing it. "I appreciate that," I said quietly. "But I'm not going to start helping with the mortgage again." "Mom, please. We're going to be homeless." "No, you're not. You'll find somewhere cheaper to live. You'll downsize. You'll adjust your lifestyle to match what you can actually afford. That's what adults do when they can't maintain their current situation." "I can't believe you're being this cold." "I'm not being cold, Brian. I'm being honest. For years I helped you because I thought that's what family did. But you taught me that family has conditions. That I was only valuable when I was useful. So now I'm applying the same rules you applied to me. That's not fair. You're right. It's not. But life isn't fair, and neither are the consequences of our choices. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not acceptance, exactly. But maybe understanding. Or at least the beginning of it. Dad would have wanted you to help us, he said finally, and it was a low blow, using Harold's memory as a weapon. Your dad would have wanted you to stand on your own 2 feet and treat your mother with respect. He would have been ashamed of how you handled Christmas. Brian flinched like I'd slapped him. I have to go, I said, taking hold of my cart. Good luck, Brian. I hope you and Clara figure things out. I walked away before he could respond, before I could see his face crumple, before the guilt could take hold and drag me back into the cycle I'd finally broken free from. My hands shook as I finished my shopping. My chest felt tight. But I didn't turn around. I didn't change my mind. Because I finally understood something Harold never taught me, something I'd had to learn the hardest way possible. Love isn't just about giving. It's about respecting the person you're giving to enough to let them face the consequences of their choices. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let people fall, because that's the only way they'll learn to catch themselves. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived it brought color back to the world. Tulips pushing through the dirt in my flower beds, trees budding with new leaves, birds singing in the mornings like they had something to celebrate. I heard through mutual friends that Brian and Clara had moved. Not homeless like Brian had feared, but into a smaller rental on the other side of town. A 2-bedroom apartment instead of a 4-bedroom house. No garage. No yard. No space for all the furniture they'd accumulated over the years. The house I'd helped them buy sold at auction. They lost their equity, their investment, everything they'd built. And while I didn't celebrate their loss, I didn't mourn it either. It was simply what happened when you built your life on a foundation you didn't own, on money you didn't earn, on the assumption that someone else would always catch you when you fell. I spent the spring doing things I hadn't done in years. I joined a book club at the library and made friends with 3 women around my age who actually seemed to enjoy my company. I started volunteering at a local food bank on Tuesday mornings. I took a watercolor painting class at the community center and discovered I was terrible at it but loved it anyway. I spent my money on myself for the first time in decades. I got new curtains for the living room. I took a weekend trip to visit a cousin I hadn't seen in years. I bought the expensive coffee Clara used to bring over, just to see what it tasted like, and decided it wasn't any better than what I made at home. On a warm day in early April, I was planting tomatoes in my garden when a car pulled up to my house. I recognized it immediately, Brian's truck, the one Clara had been driving after her car broke down. Clara got out, and I noticed immediately that something was different about her. She wasn't wearing designer clothes or perfect makeup. She looked tired. Real. Human in a way she hadn't looked before. She walked toward me slowly, like she was approaching something dangerous, and stopped a few feet away from where I was kneeling in the dirt. "Margaret," she said quietly, "can we talk?" I sat back on my heels and looked up at her. "If you're here to ask for money, the answer is no." "I'm not. I'm here to apologize." I studied her face, looking for the manipulation, the angle, the sweetness that would turn sour the moment she didn't get what she wanted. But all I saw was exhaustion and something that might have been genuine regret. "I'm listening," I said. She took a breath. "You were right. About everything. We used you. We took advantage of your generosity and we treated you like you didn't matter. And I'm sorry." "Why now? Why not months ago when you could have prevented all of this?" "Because I didn't understand until we lost everything. I didn't get it until we had to move into that tiny apartment and sell half our furniture and actually live on what we could afford. I thought we deserved the life we had because we worked hard for it. But we didn't work for it. You paid for it. And when you stopped, it all fell apart because there was nothing real holding it up." I pulled off my gardening gloves and stood slowly, brushing dirt from my knees. "And Brian? Does he feel the same way?" "He does. He wanted to come but he was afraid you'd slam the door in his face." "I might have. You'd have had every right to." We stood there in silence for a moment, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months when I thought about them: sympathy. Not enough to go back to how things were. but enough to recognize that maybe they'd actually learn something from this. I accept your apology, I said finally, but things can't go back to how they were. I know. I'm not going to help with bills anymore. I'm not going to be your backup plan. If we rebuild any kind of relationship, it has to be one where I matter as a person, not as a wallet. I understand. And for what it's worth, we're doing okay. It's tight, but we're managing. Brian picked up overtime. I got a part-time job. We're learning to actually live within our means. That's good. Clara hesitated, then said, would you maybe want to come over for dinner sometime? Nothing fancy. Just spaghetti or something. Let us show you that we can host you without needing anything from you. I thought about it. Thought about all the hurt they'd caused, all the lies and exclusions and cruelties. Thought about Harold's memory and what he'd want me to do. Thought about the woman I'd become in these months alone, stronger, clearer, more sure of my own worth than I'd been in years. Maybe, I said. Not yet. But maybe eventually. Her eyes filled with tears. That's more than I deserve. Yes, I agreed. It is. She nodded, wiped her eyes, and turned to go. But then she stopped and looked back at me. Margaret? That Christmas, I know this is too late, but I am genuinely sorry. It was cruel. You didn't deserve that. No, I didn't. She got back in the truck and drove away, and I went back to planting my tomatoes. Did I forgive them? I'm not sure forgiveness is the right word for what I felt. I'd released the anger, the bitterness, the need for revenge. But forgiveness implies things go back to normal, and I knew they never would. Some bridges, once burned, light the way forward, but they can never be crossed again. Brian called me a week later. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing important, the weather, his job, my garden. It was stilted and awkward, but it was honest. No requests for help. No expectations. Just two people trying to figure out if they could rebuild something from the ashes of what they'd destroyed. I don't know where it will go from here. Maybe we'll find our way back to some version of family. Maybe we won't. But for the first time in years, I'm not the one doing all the work. I'm not the one sacrificing and giving and bending myself into shapes that hurt just to make other people comfortable. I'm just Margaret. A 74-year-old woman who learned that the most powerful revenge isn't fire or fury. It's silence. It's dignity. It's simply stepping back and letting people face the truth of who they are and what they've done. Love cannot be measured by gifts, but by inclusion, respect, and truth. The ones who choose lies will one day find themselves abandoned by them. And the ones who choose to stay silent will discover that silence can be louder than any revenge. I chose silence. I chose myself. And in doing so, I found a strength I didn't know I had. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I want to thank you. And I want you to know that if you're in a situation where you're being taken for granted, where your love is being used as a weapon against you, where your generosity is being mistaken for weakness, you have the right to walk away. You have the right to choose yourself. And that choice isn't selfish. It's survival. Some people need to lose you to understand your value. And sometimes, by the time they learn that lesson, it's too late to repair what they broke. That's not your fault. That's not your responsibility. That's just the consequence of their choices. So if there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this: know your worth. Protect your peace. And never let anyone convince you that setting boundaries makes you the villain in their story. Because sometimes the people who call you selfish are just upset that you stopped letting them use you. And that's okay. Let them be upset. You'll be free. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear about your experiences with family, boundaries, and choosing yourself. Your story might inspire someone else who needs to hear it. And remember, the strongest thing you can do is know when to walk away. Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.